Okay, so this is AP World History, Chapter 28, Part 2. And today we're going to continue on with the revolutions. The other day we looked at the ideas of enlightenment and how they inspired these revolutions. You looked at the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And today we're going to look at the Haitian Revolution and the Latin American Revolutions. Let's go ahead and get started. So, as we talked about yesterday, the Enlightenment had a lot to do with inspiring these revolutions to occur, the idea of wanting popular sovereignty, ruling over yourselves, and how that influenced the, again, the American and the French Revolution. So, how does that affect the Haitian Revolution? Well, Haiti was a colony of France at the time, and what ends up happening is that some of the soldiers from France are going into Haiti and they're talking about what's happening in their country with the revolution, and the Haitians get inspired by this, especially the slaves. And so we have the Saint-Domingue Society, which were in the society had three major groups: the whites, which were European-born colonial administrators, plantation owners, and minor aristocrats. And then you also had the gens de couleur, which were people of color who were either mulattoes and black, and then slaves. So the planters really didn't take care of the slaves, and this was leading to a really high mortality rate. A lot of people were dying, so you're bringing in continually more slaves. And a lot of violent conflicts would occur between the white owners and the slaves because of the poor treatment that was occurring. So the gens de couleur are coming from, like I said, American revolutions, and also because they're helping, with American, they also had helped with the French, and they wanted the same change that they saw in these revolutions. They wanted that in the Saint-Domingue. And in 1791, you'll see a civil war will break out with the gens de couleur and the white settlers there. And this was really a slave revolt. A lot of the slaves were the ones that were helping the gens de couleur and fighting against the white settlers. Boukman, who was a voodoo priest, he organizes this slave revolt, and it was a battle between the gens de couleur, and the slaves. The French will attempt to restore order, but they got their own stuff going on in their own country, so it becomes really difficult. The British and the Spanish will also try to interfere, but to no success. And we have Toussaint Louverture. He will aid the revolution. He was, one of the well-known black men at that time who helped in the revolution. And they will put the Spanish, the British, and the French against each other, which, if they're not working together, they're not going to defeat the revolt that's happening. And so what ends up happening is that the slave revolt is successful, and they will promulgate a constitution that gave equality and citizenship to all residents there. Gave equality and citizenship to the slaves, equality, citizenship, gens de couleur, everybody who was there. And this is going to establish the Republic of Haiti. Napoleon, as he's going through his own stuff, finds out about this. He's going to send troops to restore order, but they're not going to be able to because of a yellow fever that will get them. So in 1803, Haiti will declare independence, and 1804, you have the establishment of Haiti. So again, being inspired by what they've heard from the soldiers who had been coming in, it really inspires them to take arms against this hierarchy and say, you know what, we can fight for ourselves too. And so, like I said, this is going to inspire the wars of independence in Latin America. And just very quickly, we're going to see revolutionary ideals travel to the Spanish and Portuguese colonies here in the Americas. We remember we have the Creoles, or the Criollos, who are the European Americans. And we also see other groups of black slaves and mixed ancestry like the mestizos and the mulattoes. Remember, it's the Creoles who are benefiting from these plantations in these colonies over here, and they're the ones getting the money with Spain and Portugal. And it sought to displace a lot of, and they thought, well, you know what? We're making all this money, we're getting all this stuff. Why are we still sending money back to these colonies who, once again, are so far away and can't even really have a functioning government over here? So they really sought to displace the Peninsulares, but retain the privileged position. So pretty much saying that these Creoles, the ones who were parents, the ones whose parents are like actual European, they were born in Spain and Portugal. Their parents are born over there, but they were born in the Americas. They kind of want to get rid of the Peninsulares and kind of want to take their position. So they had a political independence that was modeled off of the U.S. to begin to do that. Mexican independence, we see Napoleon's invasion of Spain and Portugal is going to weaken the colonies because Spain and Portugal are not really going to be able to take care of their colonies because they're dealing with what's happening with Napoleon attacking them. So this gave a good opportunity for these colonies to seek independence. We see this with Mexico with Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla, and he was a parish priest, and he will create a peasant rebellion, and the mestizos will go against the colonial rule, and social and economic warfare will be against these elites kind of just fighting back, and the colonial rule will come to an end in 1821, where we see Agustin de Iturbide disposed, and Mexico will become a republic because of this. But again, it's because, you know, Spain and Portugal were kind of dealing with Napoleon over there that it weakened their colonies and allowed for these peasant rebellions to occur. We also see the Central American Federation develop, such as Guatemala, El Salvador, which was a part, all of it included Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, until 1838. So one of the well-known leaders in these Latin American independence movements, one of the well-known ones was Simon Bolivar. And he led movements of independence in South America in particular. For him, his goal was kind of to unite South America into one major country. So he took up arms against Spanish rule and disposed of most of the elites throughout South America. Like I said, he wanted this Grand Colombia, which would include Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and he had it for a moment, but it will end in 1830, where he will lose power. Through this, we also see the Brazilian independence occur. So when, again, Napoleon invades Portugal, the royal court will go to Rio de Janeiro. They think they're going to be safer there. The king will return in 1821. He's going to leave his son, Pedro, behind, and he thinks, all right, everything's cool. I've left my son there. He's going to take care of this. But again, the Creoles, they want independence the following year, and instead of fighting it, because Pedro knows he really doesn't have the forces to hold him down, he agrees, and he'll actually become emperor. So becomes Emperor Pedro. Creole dominance during this time, again, the Creole will dominate these former colonies because they feel they've been there. You know, similar again to the American colonists who, you know, don't really see an attachment to their mother country per se. So Latin American societies remained rigidly stratified. So even though they had this independence, there was still, you know, this social structure, this clear social structure that existed. And you had, in order to keep kind of this social structure, you had caudillos who were military authorities that, you know, almost a lot of times took advantage of their power in order to maintain this rigid social structure. In addition to that, you also see a continuation of slavery exist during this time. And you see a stronger or heavy importance on the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. So the Roman Catholic Church will play a big role in these independence movements or after these independence movements. But again, the important thing here is to recognize how they had been inspired through seeing what was happening in the American Revolution, seeing what was happening in the French and Haitian revolutions, thinking they could do it themselves as well and be successful at it. Probably the downfall to them is that they didn't have strong established governments in these Latin American countries that were going to push them to be stronger countries later on. Since it was a very stratified society, it actually weakened their idea of popular sovereignty. And so just keep in mind how that weakened them. How would this super stratified society weaken this idea of popular sovereignty? All right, so from all these independence movements that we see an emergence of ideologies, meaning an emergence of two ideas that develop. You have on one end conservatism and on the other liberalism, and they kind of pretty much still mean the same thing back then that they mean today. All right, just think, if you're a very conservative person, you are very traditional, you like things the way they are. Whereas if you're very liberal, you're more apt to change, you're more open to it, you're willing to see things that way. So conservatism viewed society as an organism that changed slowly. And Edmund Burke condemns radical or revolutionary change. He was one of these political thinkers at the time. So in his eyes, if nations are going to change, it's because it's going to happen naturally that they're going to change, not because a revolution occurs and it forces it to change. All right? They approved American Revolution as a natural change with historical development, but he disapproved of the French Revolution because he said it was chaotic and irresponsible to society. So his argument is it was going to be natural that the American Revolution was going to happen because of all the reasons that we had mentioned. It was so far away, the taxation without representation, that was just bound to happen. Whereas the French, he said, no, that was simple chaos where people just simply revolted for no good reason. He said if it was going to happen, it should have happened naturally, not because somebody started it. So again, conservatism, very traditional, things are going to change slowly. Then you had the other end of that spectrum, which was liberalism. So they said change is normal. Liberals say change is normal. It's a sign of progress, even when change happens, that we're moving forward. They viewed conservatives as maintaining the status quo, meaning keeping things as they are and not wanting to address inequalities. So he said, so their argument as liberals are saying, well, if you're conservative, you just want to have things the way they are. You don't want people to be equal. You don't want to fix the problems that exist. Liberals very much championed Enlightenment ideas such as freedom and equality, and liberalism came from the Atlantic revolutions, which were more concerned about civil rights. So we saw a lot of liberalist views in these Atlantic revolutions, like the Latin American revolutions or the American Revolution as well. But at the end of the 19th century, liberals began to look to the government to correct the problems. So what ends up happening is the liberals begin to say, yes, change happens and it's good and it's progressive, but the government needs to handle these problems. If there's a problem, the government should be taking care of it. John Stuart Mill argued for individual dual freedoms as well. So with these two ideologies, we also see the idea of voting rights come up. And the idea that in order to establish democratic legitimacy and popular sovereignty, universal suffrage is needed. So remember, universal suffrage is this idea of voting. And a lot of the argument was that everybody has to vote. If we're going to be equal for all, rule for all, we're going to make the idea that people are going to rule, then everybody has to have the ability to vote. And this idea comes from these Enlightenment ideals that I had just mentioned about self-government and the consent of the governed. It should be the people who make these decisions. So with these ideologies, we begin to see things being questioned, like testing the limits of revolutionary ideals like slavery. Because we're saying here everybody is equal, the people should rule over themselves, the question became, what about slavery and the slave trade? So we see the idea to end the slave trade start in the 18th century. So the early 1700s, people are like, well, you know what? Maybe the slave trade needs to end. William Wilberforce was a leading proponent of this. He was really big on trying to end the slave trade. He was a philanthropist and a member of parliament. And in 1807, he passes a bill in England to end the slave trade. And other countries will follow successively. The U.S., obviously, as you know, they will do it much, much later on in the 19th century. So some illegal trade still occurred. So don't just think, oh, we're just going to stop it. It didn't happen like that. I mean, some of it still occurred, and it took quite a long time, pretty much over all of the 19th century, for it to end. In terms of the slave trade, the movements to abolish slavery, it was a big challenge because it was going to hurt people economically. It was free labor. You're getting free labor, and now with it ending, people had to think about, well, how is this going to hurt my bottom line? How is this going to hurt my pocketbook? So ending the slave trade would ultimately, like I said, end slavery, and because it was going to affect people economically, a lot of people were not um, agreeable to it. So abolition, the freedom without equality, abolition brought legal freedom, but not political equality. So meaning, yes, legally you're free, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have the same rules applied to you under the law. You see property requirements, literacy rates, poll taxes, intimidation, all these things existed to kind of keep, black people in their place during that time. You want to vote? Well, you got to own property. You want to vote? Well, you got to be able to read. You can't read? You can't vote. You want to vote? You got to pay a tax to vote. You don't have money to pay tax? Well, you can't vote. Intimidation. Who says you're going to vote? I have a gun. You don't have any weapon. I don't think you're going to vote. So all these tactics were used to prevent Africans or African Americans to have a say in politics. White Creoles felt they were even better than the black Creoles in the Latin American areas. We also see these revolutionary ideals applied into women's rights. Enlightenment ideals and women. Most Enlightenment philosophers did not believe in women's rights. So all these guys who are talking about like freedom of equality, popular sovereignty, everybody should equal, blah, blah, blah. They meant for men. They didn't mean for women. So reformers used it to their advantage. We see Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote A Vindication for the Rights of Women, stated that women possess all the same rights as men, that they were just as educated, they contributed to society, they were just as equal as the men, and that they should have the same rights. They should be able to vote as well as everybody else. So women in revolution, women participated in revolutions in various ways. They, if they couldn't help out monetarily, they would prepare revolution. They would help with the revolutions by preparing uniforms, bandage them, manage forms, shops, and businesses while the men were away fighting for them. So they did their part as well. And they found little political freedom and equality even after they did all of this. So the women's rights movement, by the 19th century, women passed for their rights and the abolition of slavery. Women pressed for their rights and abolition of slavery. Really pushing this idea of wanting to be equal to men. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she called for women's rights. The movement gained limited success in the 19th century, but gained momentum in the 20th century with, obviously, we know with the 19th Amendment for the United States, women had the right to vote. But it took a really long time for women to reach that point, even though they felt that way for about 100 years. Okay, so moving on to the consolidation of national states in Europe. So we see these revolutions occurring. In addition to that, we're going to see other nations form, and they're going to form under ideas of cultural nationalism. So really important you understand what nationalism is. Nationalism, to put it simply, is the love of your country. That's really what it is, saying that you love your country. So cultural nationalism refers to the type of community that became prominent in the 19th century, in the 1800s. Distinctive people are born into unique community with common language, customs, culture, values, and historical experiences. And you can see this best in European countries. You can see this best pretty much in any country, but the United States, because the United States is, very, very different in that regard. If we look at England, you had that cultural nationalism. We're all English here, and we all share a common bond in our traditions and our language. Same thing in France, same thing in Germany. This is the idea of cultural nationalism. So the nation must be a focus of political loyalty. I am going to be true to my nation because I have this cultural nationalism. And it sought to deepen appreciation for your historical experiences of the nation. You all share the same history. Again, another reason for this cultural nationalism. And it's going to create strong nationalism, such as Germany held great political nationalism. All of these countries, European countries, had really great political nationalism, cultural nationalism, to the point where it's really what is going to be something that's going to lead into World War I. So political nationalism advocates of nationalism demanded loyalty and solidarity from their members. People that lived in lands of foreign rule or who were the minorities often sought their own independence. And this could often lead to conflicts between the ruled and the rulers. So again, the idea that I'm identifying myself with a country and that I'm going to do whatever I have to do to fight for that country is really the idea here. And as I said before, it's going to lead into a lot of problems because people are going to truly believe that their country is better than another country. And with that, meaning that the people there are better than other people. And it's going to lead to conflicts such as nationalism and anti-Semitism. So we see as the Zionist movement occur in the 1800s, and pretty much what Zionism is the idea that the Jewish people have the right to their own national homeland. So this is what's happening in Europe. Everybody has this cultural nationalism. I'm French, I'm British, I'm Italian, I'm Spanish, I'm German. Everybody has this and feel a part of an identity. They identify with each other. They have their own identity. Well, the Jews have been displaced for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and they cannot say, I identify as a British person, because they don't. They're not naturally from there. Their history doesn't exist from there. And so what Zionism did was say that, you know what, we as Jewish people, we should have our own national homeland. And Jews were throughout Europe and often, like I said, the minorities. They had no national identity, no cultural nationalism or political nationalism. And a lot of the nationalists, the people who felt such a strong feeling towards their country, they distrusted the Jews and brought anti-Semitism to them. So anti-Semitism is discrimination against Jews. That's what anti-Semitism is. And they felt that, well, you know what? They are not a part of us. They are not like us. They don't share our same history. They don't share our same culture. They don't share our same traditions. They're the outsider. They're a threat to us. And especially you could see this visible in Eastern Europe, such as Austria-Hungary and Germany. Keep this in mind with World War I, World War II. So we see this starting very, very early. So with Zionism, we see Theodor Herzl, journalist, realized anti-Semitism was a persistent feature of human society and assimilation could not be solved. Again, think about it. Since the beginning, the Jews have been displaced. From the very beginning we heard about them, they have been moving everywhere. They can't find a homeland because they've been displaced from the original homeland. So they founded the World Zionist Organization, which sought to find a home for the Jewish community. The location was one of either the ancient kingdom of Israel, which is today Palestine. And they said, this is our homeland. This is where we started. This is where we belong, in Palestine. And it provoked resentful nationalism from displaced Arabs. Again, this will lead to, later on, other conflicts like the Arab-Palestinian conflicts and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Because they will claim it as their homeland, and the Arabs who are there are saying, no, this is our homeland. So just keep that in mind. So the Congress of Vienna, what was it? So the Congress of Vienna from 1814 to 1815. After the great powers, which were Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, disposed Napoleon, a meeting was held to return power back into the hands of the old pre-revolutionary order. So all these changes are happening. And what ends up happening is this group of old school people get back together and say, you know what? Let's just put power back into the hands of where it was before. And we don't want one country to dominate another one. And if we do this, then we'll be okay. If we put things back to the way they were before revolution, then we'll be okay. So this meeting and the return to old ways proved futile and did not last long, only 100 years. And the idea of popular sovereignty had been embedded into the citizens of the nations. So this attempt to kind of put things back didn't really work. It didn't work at all. And it was too late. Popular sovereignty had taken over. So national rebellions also occur. In the 1820s and 1840s, we see a wave of national rebellions occur throughout Europe and France. Greeks sought and gained independence from the Ottoman Turks. So you have the establishment of Greece as a country. Rebellions in France, Spain, and Portugal called for constitutional governments based on popular sovereignty. So France, Spain, and Portugal, they will turn their countries into constitutional governments. And Belgium, Italy, and Poland called for the formation of national states. So Belgium, Italy, and Poland will become their own countries. So pretty much during this time, 1800s, 1820s to 1840s, we're seeing the countries that you know now in Europe as being established. We have the unification of Italy and Germany with Cavour and Garibaldi. So the Prime Minister of King Vittor Emmanuel II of Piedmont and Sardinia united with National Advocate of Independence to expel the Austrian authorities from northern Italy to establish Italy as a country. And we also see this occurring with Otto von Bismarck. We see the Prime Minister. He drew German sentiment against Denmark, Austria, and France in 3 victorious wars. Again, the idea of cultural nationalism, political nationalism. He's going to draw up that German pride. And the Prussian King William I will announce the establishment of the Second Reich. And the Second German Empire following the Holy Roman Empire. So the Second Reich. Reich means empire. All right? And he's saying we're claiming this. The Holy Roman Empire was the First Reich, and so now they're the Second Reich. And if you remember in World War II, Germany or Adolf Hitler will be the Third Reich, the Third Empire. Unification and nationalism had enormous potential at this point, and the national states created the flags, anthems, holidays, and created schools, national populations, recruitment to foster patriotism and patriotic values under the German state. So that's pretty much it. That is the whole, revolutions and how countries developed in Europe at this point. And it's going to lead to a lot of conflict in the area. The Industrial Revolution will not help with this because it's going to lead to a lot of stockpiling of weapons, a lot of cultural nationalism, political nationalism that will occur in these areas, which will lead into World War I. But that will come later on in the other chapters. Okay, so we shall see you guys later in the next screencast.